Hi there everyone, welcome to this video. This video I want to have a look at the different types of black hole that there are. Some of them are theorized, some of them we have observed in some way or another, but there's quite a few different types actually. There's four main types when you look at the properties, but we can also actually categorize them with their mass. So I'm going to kind of go through those and just kind of point out what the different types are, because they're not all created equally. They're all quite different actually. So first thing, just kind of a recap on what black holes are. I'm going to assume that actually you've kind of got a good idea what a black hole is if you found your way to this video. But basically black holes are not like normal stars in the sense that they would be in hydrostatic equilibrium where the gravitational forces trying to collapse them are balanced out by the pressure. Here gravity wins and the object is essentially collapsed down to pretty much a singularity. So there's no outward pressure which can stop that collapse, although we don't really know what's kind of inside the event horizon of a black hole, so maybe there is some additional pressure so it doesn't go to an absolute point. But anyway, they're not quite like stars, they're not really in hydrostatic equilibrium, and they've been collapsed to a very small point basically due to how massive they are. Well, actually that's not technically true given the first type of black hole we're actually going to have a look at. So another thing with black holes is they have this thing called the event horizon, and this is an area around the black hole where even light can't escape, hence I suppose the name black hole. We can't really see physically a black hole, and this event horizon is generally kind of symmetric around it given the type of black hole that we might be talking about. It's not always, depending on which black hole we're talking about, but this is an area where light can't escape. So essentially the escape velocity at that location is equal to or greater than the speed of light. So the first thing we can basically characterize or classify a black hole by is its mass. So they actually have a huge range of masses. There's not just any kind of distinct size. So for example, a neutron star has a very narrow band of mass in which it can exist. Black holes on the other hand, they can have such a wide spectrum and they can be less than one solar mass. So you haven't come across this symbol before. You've got the M with the circle and the dot in. That means it's a solar mass, so the mass of the sun. We can have black holes less than that, so quite small black holes actually. And then we can have them all the way up to kind of greater than 10 to the 10 solar masses. So that is an enormous mass for a single object basically. And actually we have black holes all the way in between that as well. So the first one, looking at the lower end, is most likely going to be your primordial black holes. So these are formed in the early universe from very slight density fluctuation. So the universe was a lot denser back then, a lot hotter, and there would have been very slight density fluctuations. And if the density was over some critical threshold for forming a black hole, you'd get a black hole being formed, and they can have very small masses actually. So that's where your masses less than one solar mass could come from, but they typically might range from quite small or maybe even asteroid sort of mass to, you know, a few thousand solar masses. Now the issue here is we haven't actually observationally confirmed these exist, they're theoretical. And the reason for that probably is that they would have evaporated. So if you look at things like Hawking radiation, which I'm not going to cover here, but black holes do eventually evaporate due to Hawking radiation, and the lower mass ones in this range here, given when they formed in the universe, are unlikely to still be around now unless they were very high mass. Now the next one up is your stellar black holes. Now these form from your type 2 supernovas, so basically when the star dies, the core collapses and you essentially get a very dense core which overshoots the neutron degeneracy pressure, so it can collapse down to essentially a singularity. Some information there for how it creates the actual supernova remnant, what we can actually see that part of it. You kind of get a rebound of that and a wave propagating out. But for a black hole, it just collapses beyond the neutron degeneracy pressure. And the typical range for that is basically probably 3 to 100 or so solar masses for the actual core. And with regards to kind of like, the neutron stars and that, they would be a lower core mass than this. So you're talking around about 2 solar masses or so. And at this point here, the gravitational force trying to collapse it is balanced by the neutron degeneracy pressure. There's not enough mass there to overcome that pressure. But with a black hole, you've gone beyond that sort of threshold. So it gives us this sort of range of black holes, and we would call those stellar black holes. So the lower end, basically, for core mass of a black hole from a massive star is about 2 to 3 solar masses, thereabouts. Again, it's not a definitive hard line. It's not well established, or it's not well defined, I should say. But these are massive stars. So maybe you're looking at a star when it was on the main sequence, maybe 20 solar masses and above, could then collapse to a black hole once it's finished that fusion in its core and it's no longer producing an outward pressure to balance the gravitational forces. Now your next one up is the one that we again don't really have much evidence for observationally, is your intermediate black holes. So these are greater than stellar mass black holes or stellar black holes. So these are not produced when massive stars die, but they're not quite the biggest black holes we have in the universe. So much higher than what we get from a supernova, and typical range would be hundreds, thousands to tens of thousands of solar masses. So basically 10 to the 2, 10 to the 5 solar masses. Typically, again, broad range. We don't really have much evidence for these. There's kind of a bit of a gap. So when we look out into the universe and try and identify or look for these intermediate black holes, they're not really there, which is a bit confusing because we would expect those to be kind of like a transition point from stellar black holes to maybe your supermassive black holes, but it might not be the case. So here is an example of one found in a kind of dense cluster, really, and potential intermediate black hole here. But it's thought that in these sorts of environments here, maybe these intermediate mass black holes can be formed by the merger of stellar mass black holes, or even the mergers of very massive stars. So then you can go above that threshold, which would be the upper limit to a single star creating a black hole. So they should be out there, but we don't see much evidence of them. And the likely formation process is probably going to be, mergers of existing stellar mass black holes. And then the top range is your supermassive black holes, and these are found in the centers of pretty much every galaxy. Nearly all galaxies have these supermassive black holes, and these can be upward of 10 to the 10 solar masses, so an enormous mass, and can actually contribute a significant fraction of the total mass of a galaxy. And yeah, pretty much all of them kind of sit there in the centers of galaxies, and they can be active or dormant. So if they're active, it means that they're kind of, I suppose, actively accreting matter. They're feeding, there's matter falling onto them, and they create these kind of powerful jets sometimes, and they're very energetic. We would call that an active galactic nuclei if it's in the center of a galaxy. Or they can be dormant, they can sit there and we don't see any high energy evidence for it, but they're still there gravitationally in the center. We just don't see those powerful jets or the powerful emission from them. Now, that is kind of looking at the mass distribution of black holes, but we can also define them by their properties. And there's two main properties a black hole can have despite its mass, and that's going to be spin. So it can be a rotating black hole, and it can have some charge as well. So it can have some kind of electric charge associated with it. And that gives rise to 4 distinct types of black hole, purely looking at their properties alone. So the first type then is your Schwarzschild black hole. And this is a non-rotating black hole, and it has no charge. The event horizon here is symmetric all the way around. It has one event horizon. They are nice and easy to understand because, yeah, again, they're symmetric. One event horizon, a singularity in the center. It's pretty no, I won't say straightforward, but they're the easiest one to understand. Most likely, they're not the most realistic one in the real world, in the natural world, but still, a Schwarzschild black hole has no spin, no charge. It is spherically symmetric, and the event horizon will scale with mass. So if we increase the mass, the event horizon also increases as a direct result of that as well, which kind of makes sense, I suppose. You then got your rotating black hole. Now this is a rotating non-charged black hole, or we would call that a Kerr black hole. So now it's got some kind of rotational energy associated with it. It's got some angular momentum. And a Kerr black hole has spin but no charge. It doesn't have spherical symmetry anymore because it's rotating. And it has two event horizons and an ergosphere. So the first thing really to note is that it has an inner and an outer event horizon. And the actual locations of those depends kind of on its spin really, but there's some very interesting things occur in between the inner and outer. They both act as like an event horizon in the same way that light can't escape them, but in between the two there's some really weird, unusual kind of like time loops and stuff, which is a bit out of the range of this particular video, but you might want to have a look into that. So it's quite interesting what occurs there. Now, the separation between the two, the inner and outer, is determined by how fast it's rotating. If it's rotating really fast, you get a big separation between the two. If it's rotating very slow, they kind of get closer and closer, to the point where if it's not rotating at all, then the inner and outer event horizon are the same location. It then becomes a Schwarzschild black hole with that single event horizon. And we also have the ergosphere, which sits outside of the inner and outer event horizons. And the ergosphere is this region which is essentially frame dragged by the rotation of the black hole. Now the black hole is rotating, there's an area outside of it where it's actually twisting and distorting the space around the black hole. So the ergosphere then, as we mentioned, it sits outside the inner and outer horizons. It's a region where space-time is dragged around it, and the shape of it is oblate, or it can be kind of like pumpkin sort of shaped. Again, the actual shape of it is determined by the spin. It comes in closer at the pole, the rotational poles, the rotation axis, then and it goes further out on the equator because it's obviously, it's spinning like that. It's dragging the space in that sort of direction there. So it's that space that's dragged, the space-time around it is dragged by the black hole's rotation. If you were to put a particle there, anything within the ergosphere, it's going to move due to the frame drag in there. So if you're stationary in the space, to an outside observer, you're going to look like you're moving with that frame dragging, even if you're not. So you're essentially being moved by that. And there is an interesting thing you can do there. You can actually extract rotational energy from the black hole if you're in the ergosphere, and it's called the Penrose process, which I've done a separate video on. But you may have come across it in some movies like Interstellar, where they actually use the Penrose process to extract energy from the black hole to actually get out and give the spacecraft energy. And then the final type of black hole or black holes relate to them being charged. So the black hole can basically can possess some electric charge, but they're not necessarily thought to form naturally. So we're unlikely to kind of necessarily find these much in nature. So the first type then is a black hole that has electric charge, but it doesn't have any spin. And I'm probably going to pronounce this completely wrong. So it's the Reissner Nordström black hole. So electric charge, no spin. You've also got one which has electric charge and spin, and this is known as a Kerr-Newman black hole. But the most likely black holes that we probably have in the universe is going to be a Kerr black hole. And the reason for that is most astrophysical objects rotate. So as a star, for example, collapses to form a black hole, or even if they form in the early universe from a density fluctuation, there will be some net rotation there. So as it collapses, it will kind of likely spin. So we expect Kerr black holes to be the most likely in the universe. So thank you for watching the video. If you enjoy, then do consider becoming a member of the channel. There's extra videos in the members section, but it also helps support the channel. So thank you for watching.